Adobe Illustrator is a vector-based software program in which it uses lines and curves to create vector graphics, unlike Photoshop, which uses pixels, essentially dots, to create graphics. In our example, this artwork is actually a bitmap image that we've imported into Photoshop. If you zoom into the image, you'll actually see that it actually is kind of pixelated in certain areas in which we aren't using lines and curves to actually create the image. It's still using dots. Again, we're in a vector-based program, but until we turn a bitmap into a vector, it will still use a raster, essentially pixels, to create the image. Now, once you've selected the object, you can come to Live Trace. The majority of the trace options are actually within this drop-down. Now, there are many different types of tracing options within here. The one that you'll use most of the time will be the 6-color. But again, it'll all depend on the artwork. If it's a 1-color image, you might want to use this. Tracing actually doesn't take much time and it's pretty automated, so it's a good idea to just try a few different ones based on the type of artwork that you bring in. You also can come down here to tracing options, where you will actually have many different options as far as how you want the image to trace, just to give you that much more flexibility. So if we come here and we come down to 6-color, it'll tell us that it's going to take a little bit longer because this has a little bit more detail than some images. And as you can see, it actually did change it to a vector. And if you zoom in, you'll notice that now we use curves and lines, not pixels, to create the image. Now that we have this created, converted to a vector, what you can do is you can come over to expand. By clicking expand, essentially we are breaking up all of the anchor points that separate each color within the object. Once you've broken the object up, you can actually make a selection. From here you can change its color, you can move it, you can delete it, and you can even mess with the anchor points so that you actually change the actual shape of this. Now, all of these shapes, essentially these colors, are trapped into a path. And if you come over to the layers and you click under the group, you'll actually see all of the paths that make up this image. Again, because it's a vector program, it's not using pixels, it's using lines and curves, and all of those lines and curves are actually within the layer. Now, the main tools that you'll use when editing or creating new artwork are over here on the left and over here on the right. The layout of Illustrator will all depend on how you want it to look. If you come to Window, you'll actually see different workspaces. So we have this like Photoshop, and the reason we have this like Photoshop is the majority of the time somebody learns Photoshop and then they later learn Adobe Illustrator. Photoshop is a little bit more intuitive and simple, and it gives you more flexibility when dealing with bitmap images, which you often work with when it comes to digital printing. Working in Illustrator for a digital print is not always necessary if it's going to be a full color image. So over here, just like Photoshop, we have a selection tool, but we also have a direct selection tool, which allow us to actually select something directly within the artwork versus the selection tool allowing us to select all of the artwork. The magic wand tool works just like it does in Photoshop. It actually selects a color, but within Illustrator, if we actually select, for instance, this red, in Photoshop it would just select this portion. In Illustrator it's going to select all of the same color. So it's a handy tool when you're actually separating colors, so you need to delete or move an actual color. Again, like Photoshop, we have a lasso tool which allow us to make a selection. From there we can move it or delete an area. We have a text tool so that we can actually type our text, and then once we've typed the text, we'll go over how to actually edit it using the character settings. The pen tool is a tool that you don't have in Photoshop, and the pen tool is really another type of tracing tool outside of the live trace. The pen tool will allow you to choose the anchor points. So if you want to get it exactly traced, let's say you're working in a really bad bitmap, you can use the pen tool to actually trace it a little bit better and get that really smooth line. but it's more for the advanced users of Illustrator. Down here you can actually create lines, and then you have an actual shape tool, which again works just like it does in Photoshop to create shapes. Pencil tool, again just like in Photoshop, paintbrush tool, and an eraser tool. These you aren't going to use as much as you would in Photoshop, just because Photoshop you're more manipulating artwork versus when you're working in Illustrator, you're either converting a bitmap to a vector or you're creating a new vector image in which you're going to use clip art and text, but you're not going to do a lot of erasing and so forth. A lot of these other tools, they're more advanced and they're just not that common. Down here we have our fill tool. This color right here represents the actual fill, and this with the line through it is actually our stroke color. And we'll go over more about how to apply a stroke in Illustrator because it's much different than in Adobe Photoshop, and how to actually select the color of a stroke. So if we come over to delete this line, down here we have our layers. Now, once you've selected a layer, it'll go into isolation mode. And when it's in isolation mode, you don't have a lot of capabilities as far as creating a new layer and so forth. As you can see, if we want to create a new layer, it's not going to let us. So if you click off of the object and now you come down to create new layer, it'll actually allow you to create a new layer. If you want to copy everything, you can't necessarily just duplicate it. You actually have to select all of it, and then we can go to Command C, and let's say we wanted to make a backup on another layer. We can then, if we hit Command V, it would just paste it, but if we hit Command F, it pastes in place. So it'll paste it right over the other layer that it was on. And there, now you can see that there are two layers, and essentially we have a backup of our group. So if we made changes, we have a backup just like we do in Photoshop. Now, the appearance and other settings over here are much different than they are in Photoshop. First of all, you actually have your fill and stroke color. So let's say we actually select the black. We use our magic wand tool to just select the black. Now, that's our fill color. If we click on the fill color, we can choose to color overlay essentially that color. Now, it's a good idea to come down here and add new swatches from the get-go when you start in Illustrator, because whenever you're creating a vector, odds are, if you're going to use it for screen printing, we're going to have to color separate it. And the easiest way to color separate an image is to use CMYK values. So, we're going to come to Create New Swatch. We're going to be in the CMYK color mode, and we're going to make a few different color swatches real quick. So we'll make 100% cayenne. We'll also create 100% magenta, 100% yellow, and 100% black. Now, these color swatches will appear whenever we go to use a color or a stroke, and we can choose from these colors. And again, later on, it'll make color separation for screen printing much easier. You can also click right here, which will actually make that color transparent, which is very handy compared to having to select it and delete it in Photoshop. Again, we can come here to the stroke and apply a stroke color and then the actual width of the stroke. Over here we have several different tools. First, you have the Alignment tool, which works a lot like it does in Photoshop. We can center an image within our canvas, whether it be dead center of the canvas, center just vertically, or center horizontally, and so forth. And you can also select multiple objects at one time to actually align them with. If we come to the Transform tool, it works again a lot like it does in Photoshop. It allows us to transform the location and the bend and warp of the image. Right here we have the Pathfinder tool, which we don't have in Photoshop, and Pathfinder is a bit advanced for most Illustrator users. Pathfinder is a good tool for when you're creating a vector or you're actually tracing a vector and you're trying to find the paths exactly within the object. Right here we have the character tool, which works a lot like it does in Adobe Photoshop. You can choose your type of font, how you want it to actually be, whether it be bold, italic, and so forth, the spacing between letters, the spacing between lines of text, and so forth. We also have the paragraph tool, which allows you to essentially manipulate longer amounts of text to look just like you want it to. And lastly, you have the open type tool, which gives you more options as far as text and so forth. Up top, you'll have obviously save as. When it comes to Photoshop or Illustrator, we have many different vector options right here between EPS, SVG, PDF. It's a good idea to save most files as an AI or an SVG or EPS because just about every other program is going to be able to open them. Within the edit, we have cut, copy, and paste, just like we do in Photoshop. You'll also have some more tracing presets and color settings that you may want to actually use here and there. Within the object, now, for these options to be actually shown, we actually have to, again, be working with a vector that has been expanded so that we can actually select a certain part of the object. Use our selection tool, and here we'll just select that part. And if we come to object, we can transform, which allows us to move, rotate, reflect, and so forth. We can group it, we can ungroup it, we can expand it, and many different things. Again, Illustrator allows you to really manipulate a vector, but not that full color image like you would in Photoshop. The type just allows, again, more character settings as far as the font, the way it displays, and so forth. When it comes to selection, the same and object are actually pretty handy. So right now we're selected on the red. So if we come to same and we go to fill color, it's going to select all of the red within the design, which is pretty cool. And again, the object, kind of similar, it allows you to select an actual object and find the ones that look just like it within the artwork. The effect, it allows you to add different types of effects. Again, the warp is a handy tool for when you're using text. If you want to arch it or give it any other type of text effect, this is where you're going to want to come to apply it. And then again, the view and the window really control what all you see and how Illustrator is actually laid out. Again, Adobe Illustrator is a bit more advanced than Photoshop, but once you play with it, it starts to slowly become more and more intuitive. It all revolves around being able to trace a vector and create a vector from scratch. If you have any questions about how to use Adobe Illustrator, please do not hesitate contacting us. Thank you.